So we are going to start with, I thought we would start with Evelyn Kimathi from the Kimathi Foundation, because she could give us sort of like a heartfelt start to what we are going to talk about, because this is something that is emotionally draining. In Africa, we believe that ancestors, before people who die become ancestors, we must send them off. So we have 1090 people who are yet to become ancestors because we have not given them the proper rights to send them off. So I think I will start with Boniface Mondi. I hope it's okay to call you Bonnie here. It's okay, yeah? Okay. Bonnie is my friend. So you have personal experience with the legacy of Mau Mau as a second generation. So maybe you could tell us more about it and how that legacy, what that legacy means for you personally, even before we talk about the people who we have not yet sent off to the ancestral world. Yes, okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So my grandfather was a Mau Mau fighter, and he spent 6 years in Manyani prison. My grandmother was involved in the movement, and when my grandfather was in jail, when he came back, he found that my grandmother had 2 kids. But when he was going to jail, my grandmother had only 1 child. I would meant that she was raped by the home guards. And when after 6 years in Manyani prison, he came back home, a very bitter person. And after independence, there was no reparations. And that meant my grandfather went back to work in the Sisal farms owned by white people. So the legacy of Mau Mau in our family is a heartful legacy that no one talks about. Because also my grandmother's sister, my grandmother, they also built Mukurani Stadium. They were living in, they were called Idamerio, like the villagizations they were put in villages where they could only come out during the day to go for food and come back at night. And so what my grandparents did, especially my grandmother, is when she came out, we got independence, she blocked that past with Christianity and salvation and going to church and believing in the white Jesus. And also that applies to Kimathi's forest wife. When Kimathi forest wife came out and she converted to Christianity, she refused to talk about her past, saying it was a sinful past. So we find that because of the very dark legacy of Mau Mau, where that they fought for independence, they sacrificed so much, but what they were fighting for was not just independence. It was freedom in land. And we got a bit of political freedom without the land. And that's, as we talk about bringing back the bodies and getting them to be buried, what about reparations? A couple of weeks ago, we hosted the King of England, and he got a red carpet welcome in our country, which is very hurtful for people who lost their loved ones in the struggle for independence. As we speak today, over 6 million acres are still in the hands of British settlers. The land that we fought for is still in the hands of the British. If you're driving along Naivasha Road, between Naivasha Road and Kiambu Road, there's 11 families who own that entire land. If you're driving from Nairobi and you're going to Central Province, you get from Thika Road, half of it is Kenyatta family, then from there you have Kakuzi, you have Del Monte, then you have Kakuzi. So even the land that you're fighting for doesn't belong to them. So we need to have a broader conversation beyond getting the artifacts and getting things for the museums. We talk about the land. Because the desolation in this country is because the land doesn't belong to us at all. So we must visit our past and talk about it. If you go on Twitter or TikTok today, or take a random sample, I was very surprised that my kids don't know who Kapengure 6 are. And those are kids of someone who is very politically aware and politically educated. And now it's me to teach them who the Kapengure 6 are. On Monday, I was teaching a class of young citizen journalists from Kiambu County. So they all come from the same area where Kenyatta comes from, and they don't know Kapenguria 6. So we have failed our kids for not teaching them history, because the only way we can liberate our country from imperialism and colonization is by giving them a political education, because they have a basis for their arguments, they have a basis for their struggle, and they have an anchor to their messaging. Because you can't have a message in abstract. You must have an identity, and you must connect to our ancestors and their struggle and their toil and their blood, and then live forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So how did you know? I mean, you're very well versed. So how do you know what you know, including about the Kapenguria 6? Was this told to you by your relatives, or did you read about it yourself, or how did you get to know? Since your children are not getting that information from school.
So actually, we learned about Kapenguria 6 in school. There was that education. Was it deep? No. There was we learned about Moi and Kibaki and other people in our history books. But I think as we change curriculums a lot, some things are relegated. I realized that my kids know more about American and British history than Kenyan history. And it's unfortunate. So I'm a middle class Kenyan who went to a public school that had good education. But it has been destroyed so much that I can't risk my kids' future by taking them to a public school. But in the past, all the leaders we have in power, including the current president and his deputy, all are public school educated. The only exception we had actually was Uhuru Kenyatta, who went to private schools. However, Kenyatta started school in Lady Norfolk, which is a public nursery school on Cedars Road. So he began his school education in a public school, but it has been destroyed. I learned how to read in a public school. I learned how to cook because we grew up in a poor family in a public school. I learned the basics actually, even singing in a public school. So that's where I learned the basics. But today, because I employ people, I have a couple of employees, you realize that what we got in our days, that's 20, 30 years ago, and what we have today it's like day and night.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll go to you, Professor. I am assuming that you are here by virtue of the studies you have been doing.
Indeed, yes.
Yes, in the Mau Mau legacy. Maybe you could explain for us what is the historical problem that we are dealing with, besides, well, I think lack of restitution on the land is a major one, but what is the intellectual and institutional infrastructure that's preventing that restitution from happening?
Well, thank you very much. I teach at the University of Nairobi. I'm a Mau Mau scholar. We have categories that did not agree with the British, but for their own reasons, maybe their Christian faith, they felt compelled not to join the Mau Mau. Yet we lump them together, and that historical legacy persists so that we are a divided nation, loyalists and collaborators. I think we need to move away from that narrative and look at that look at that movement again. The other one was about the terminologies, resistant, revolutionary. I don't know how to answer that, but I think there is always a problem in history, what we call presentism, that we can only look back with our present eyes, because that's all we have, right? So the terms that we want to use, I understand that. And one of the narratives perpetuated against the Mau Mau is that what was the ideological stand? There are those who argue that it had no ideology. What do they mean, right? Ideology, idea. What is it that those freedom fighters who've never heard of Karl Marx or Che Guevara, whoever it is, and yet they knew what it is they wanted? And to me, if we are talking about legacy this morning, that would be the ideological legacy of the Mau Mau, the spirit for which they suffered and died. If nothing more, we can all embrace that. Thank you.
Thank you. You've reminded me that it's like us Africans, we are not allowed to craft our own ideologies. They must always come from somewhere. Yeah, that's part of the problem. Okay, Bonnie?
The only way to make sure that everyone knows about the Mamau and becomes part of everyday conversation is to that word, the Kikuyu in me. Memorialize their struggle and their wins. When you travel, either you go to Berlin or you go to Washington, D.C., you see monuments, you see stories of what happened there. So I was even telling the governor of Nairobi, for example, Central Police Station Haritukuro should be renamed to Njiro. It should be a plaque of what happened on that particular street. So every street that you have has a name and a history of what happened. We need to rename our lake, we need to rename our hills, we need to if you climb up on Kenya, there's Lake Alice, there's all these peaks named after white people we don't even know. And so the Thompson Gazelle, just rename everything and give it our own identity. The moment you lose connection with your past, then you have no history and you have nothing to go back to. There's a trend in Senegal, I think it's the Bomba or the Bamba, who, when the women get married, they don't change their names. And they say because if something happens to them and they call out their ancestors, if they have a new name, the ancestors would answer. Because your name is identity. So we have lost our culture and lost our names. We need to get back that. Ongoing efforts, I was involved in a traveling exhibition called Heroes Exhibition, where we used to tell stories about the past and show who the heroes are. And we try to get that into a magazine that we can distribute for free. But the biggest part or the biggest letdown of this struggle is that the people in power don't want you to know. Because if you know, they're in trouble. So our ignorance and our lack of knowledge in that particular part of our history is the reason why they're in power. And if we get to know about it, then they're going to lose their power. For example, the struggle for independence and the first politicians we had in this country were funded by the people. The people chose to go and work and serve them and live among them and become their representative. Nowadays we elect lords of poverty and lords of immunity who lord over us. And instead of them becoming public servants, they are mini gods that you worship in their altar. And they have changed the meaning of service, they have changed the meaning of leadership. But if we had knowledge of our history and the sacrifice that went to give us independence, then we will actually fight back. And that's the ideology they are talking about. What is our ideology? And that is liberation. But Mau is still revered in our hip-hop songs. In the culture, in the ghetto, we talk about them. We call it, there's even a hip-hop called Mau, Fulani Mau, and the song is about liberation. And when we listen in the old reggae songs, they also sing about the Mau and the Kimadi. So their spirit lives on in us. Thank you.
First thing is, let me come to Juma Deng's comment about public participation. I mean, I think I take the point that it is important for citizens to articulate themselves on public policies, good or bad. Right? I think that's an important point. We did so recently on the finance bill. 1,000 memoranda went into the exchequer and they were ignored. Taxes were generated, they continue to be generated, but not in our name. And I think that the important thing is to also push back for those of us who are not in service, in public service, at least in government. I have always believed that anybody who takes action in public interest is a member of the public service. But to argue that bad laws are bad laws regardless of whether the citizens comment on them or not. So I think there is a responsibility for those people crafting these laws to recognize that they are bad laws whether 1,000 people submit memoranda or not. So that would be the first thing. But I think your other point, which I think is an interesting point, which is, you know, back in 1952 to 1956, we had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So Eleanor Roosevelt and a few other people met in Paris. They developed this wonderful document that we are celebrating 75 years in the next couple of weeks. And they declared that, that there is such a thing as an international crime. But it did not exist in 1952 when Gitu Akaingere and Muthoni Kirima and all the freedom fighters were taking action. But it would probably be the case now, if you retroactively applied it, that crimes against civilians would still be an international crime. But I think we have to go back to, what actually happened at that time. Maybe that's the spiritual blessing that I would end with. Language, Brian. Language matters, right? I don't use the word rebellion to talk about what happened between 1952 and 1956, or even up to 63. I talk about revolution. I talk about liberation. That's the language that dignifies the sacrifice that was taken by our foremothers and our forefathers. I don't use the word decolonization. I use the word liberation. Because the word decolonization is something that people in power and privilege give others. Like we decide to decolonize. No, what happened in Kenya was not a decolonization. It was an act of revolution against an oppressor. There was no willing seller, willing buyer in 1963. Right? It was a consequence of a hard-earned struggle that we won. It is actually not accurate even to talk about Mau Mau, because Dedan Kimathi and the others did not talk about Mau Mau. They talked about the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army. Land and freedom. They were clear. Not Umau, then it became Mau Mau. Kenyan Land and Freedom Army. So language really matters. So practically what we can do, we can first of all continue to decriminalize our liberation heroes. We can continue to teach the history as it should be taught. And as much as possible, find those people who were there to teach that history themselves. We can situate ourselves and human rights and the current struggle for justice and dignity within a historical context. We are not orphans. We are not political or social justice orphans. We stand on the back of people who have waged the struggle for centuries, not even decades. And lastly, for my sister from Sweden, we can locks with pride. That hairstyle has a history. It has a courageous, backbone that is captured for decades. Let me turn very quickly to the issue that I think has been raised about, is it important to have roads? Is it important to have stories, books, and so on? The US have several presidential libraries. And this is a fun fact. All of the US presidential libraries have about 400 million pages. They store about 100,000 audio and videotapes. If you line all of that together, like you lined it up on the street, on the roads between Lokchogyo and Mombasa, you could go 5 times on the back of all this material. Right? Now, that is a part of the world that has taken their history seriously. But let me just poke a hole in it a little. Because material culture of executive power has less power for me than the power of the Kenya Land and Freedom Army fighters. Imagine what it would be like if we created in each of the 47 counties memorial spaces where not only could you hear the stories, but that you could rededicate yourselves to the integrity, to the courage, to the humility and the extraordinary service of those who have gone before us. Imagine what that would feel like to walk into a space like that and to walk out knowing that the day that you take an action against a school grab or against corruption or against discrimination on the basis of identity, that you are actually standing as a Mau Mau or a Kenya Land and Freedom Army combatant. Imagine how tall you would be in that moment. And then extend it a little bit. Imagine how tall your children would be. Yeah? Bonis in particular. Those ones are like a breed of freedom fighters in their own right. Last comment, I think just because of time. So I had a chance to go to the Muhammad Ali Resource Center. It's out in Kentucky. And there's many things to talk about there. Muhammad Ali the boxer, not Muhammad Ali the current member of parliament in Mombasa and former whistleblower. there's a moment there in his story where he talks about the red bike. Have you heard about the red bike?
No.
So what is it that produced Muhammad Ali that was able to go up against the entire US government to give up his international heavyweight boxing championship? What was it? It was a moment when his preteens, as an adolescent, when a young boy stole his red bike. And he went to the police station as a child in Kentucky, and he said to I think Louisville, the Americans call it Louisville, not Louisville, as I was told. He went to the police station and he said to the police officer, I want to whoop the butt of the person who stole my bike. And the white police officer looked down at this young boy and said, you are too small and too puny to probably whip anybody's butt. Would you be interested to take boxing lessons? So a white police officer opened the door for the world's greatest heavyweight champion of the world and probably the most Pan-Africanist human rights defender that we've ever known. And there's something there that we can learn, the red bike moment. Gitu Wakangere talks about the day that he heard his father get shut down by a native county commissioner when he tried to ask a question after the commissioner had spoken. And in that moment, he realized that this was something that he would later call injustice. Now the question I want to leave you with is, what are those red bike moments in your lives? What are the red bike moments that we are creating in other people's lives so that they too can produce a Muhammad Ali, a Gitu Wakangere? Because if we're not consciously creating those spaces for our people, then it doesn't matter how many monuments to the Mau Mau we have. You get what I'm saying? And this is not a Kenyan conversation. This is an international conversation. So whichever nationality you're listening to me, this morning from, please come from a space that the red bike is probably the most central lesson from this conversation.
In 1887, the British government passed a law which was binding on the Crown that time, I believe, Queen Victoria, that it's called the British Overseas Settlement Act. In that act, it was very clear that those who are charged in administering territories outside the British island itself, we are supposed to treat the settlers the same way as the natives. It was very clear that the House of Commons had bound the British Crown. But this was not to be the way things were done. When they came, they even declared some parcels of land to be what they call unoccupied and waste lands. Yet when you look at them, those are the most well-watered and the most fertile. Yet when they are settling, those are supposed to be wastelands and unoccupied territories. And they were occupied. Secondly, and lastly, the British seem to have had a very good methodological way of enacting the law, but the people who are implementing the law were not following it. Before the construction of the Kenya Railway, actually they borrowed the Indian Land Compensation Act of 1894.
Thank you. Okay. I think let me ask a judge before I come to Buku. In terms of slavery, colonialism, like attempts to get historical injustices addressed because of those realities of slavery, colonialism. To what extent does that work under international law and in the current context? Because there are people, groups, and so on, and movements trying to get such historical injustices remedied. And also, from your experience at the Arusha court, some of the problems were caused because of what I think it was Belgium did in terms of its own colonization. Can they be held accountable for that?
Those two questions will take about an hour each. But let me be very quick. In relation to international law, what the British Supreme Court did is use the Limitation Act. And it said effectively, I can't remember what year it was, any dispute involving foreign land has a limitation period, 12 years. And as Bosik and many people found out, that was effectively a complete guillotine against any attempt by indigenous or any other people to get restitution or reparations from the UK government or anybody else, corporates or governments. So that the courts in Europe, and I think across the board, actually prevented and are still preventing, as does the US government Supreme Court, any attempts by the people whose land was stolen to have restitution. And therefore, one of the things I think the campaign has to be about is about our governments taking the lead. Because actually, Europe is not nearly as strong, or North America, as it thinks it is. The Israeli tail wags an American dog. The United States economy is driven by China. And you just need a little war in Ukraine, and the whole thing is in a mess. And when the British leave the European Union, they need Kenya more than Kenya needed them. And the weakness about, I think, the courts is, what happens in court is only ever 50% at most of the law. You determine what the law is by sometimes taking direct action. And so by the time slavery was abolished in 1833, people who were enslaved in the UK had freed themselves. And in terms of Kiricho Bomet, one of the most effective things that I think, and still should be done, is go and occupy your land. Go and occupy your land. You have one side of the road where you have Kenyans living in relative poverty compared to the wealth of the plantations, and they can point to the villages where their ancestors lived. The police are Kenyan and are local people. The army are Kenyan and local people. And you're all poor because some foreign shareholders, whether in Switzerland or Belgium or UK, are still taking that money. And actually, the most effective thing is, which we thought about doing, it hasn't quite happened yet, but it's been done in other parts of the world, you get a group of people who live in the area. Doesn't have to be many. You go and occupy an acre. You let yourself be arrested. Not so nice. The police take you to court. The Unilever have to bring an action against you for trespass. Well, prove your ownership. Prove your ownership. Steal the tea, take your tea. How on earth can you steal what is yours? And so for me, one of the answers, you throw the courts into turmoil. In Kenya, you throw the courts into turmoil in Europe by you taking direct action. And if this was Vietnam, that's what the Vietnamese did. Yeah. They did not wait for the colonizer to give them permission. They took it. And it doesn't have to be by force. It can be by a little bit of force and an awful lot of intelligence. And just finally, about that, Claudia Webb MP, my very good friend, wrote a letter to Boris Johnson and said, what about the restitution of historical injustices for the Kipsigi and Talai people? The letter she got back within a month was, well, actually, we gave the Mau Mau 13 million pounds of your own money. Wow. And that was the answer. Well, you're all Kenyan somehow. So therefore, the fact that we give some of you a bit of money over here, don't dare the rest of you come and ask for something. I mean, it insults your intelligence. So I think the campaigning must be direct and it must be action. Hutu and Tutsi. I mean, I'm sorry. If somebody tells us we're different, we don't have to take that difference onto a level where we kill each other. I mean, that mental slavery that Bob Marley talked about is deeply ingrained all over our communities, be in that mental abyss which pits us against one another. Free ourselves and free our minds.
Direct action. Vice Chair of Land Commission. What has been your experience in terms of dealing with historical injustices in terms of the land question in the country, and to what extent do you think the Commission is succeeding, and the government generally, in giving answers to people who come to you with the question of historical injustice in terms of land?
Thank you very much, Professor. I can go on forever, but I will contextualize my answer into two parts. The first one is how, and the second one is actually what happened, and how we can strategically address it. Now, my experience is this. Okay, we have the law where the Commission is supposed to carry out investigations on historical land injustices and make recommendations to the appropriate authorities about the appropriate redress. But then that is the problem, recommendations. My experience in Yugoslavia, it was like we are a tribunal, we do the investigation, we take to the tribunal, the judges make a determination, they bring it to me, I implement it. But here, we are only supposed to make recommendations. And you cannot even revoke a title, you can't do anything else about it. Now what happens after that is at the mercy of, not even the court, because if you can afford to go to court, sometimes you can't. That's the context. Now, let's go back and look at what it really is historical justice. And then let's not forget, our Constitution recognizes both present and historical injustices. But what I want to tell you is that the present historical part, the present part of it seems to have been shelved. But then what do we mean when we are talking about historical land injustice? I don't think people really think about it much. It's just about land rights violations. And if we go back to our history, let's contextualize in 5 short categories because of time. Number 1, the British come and they, at the stroke of a pen, they come up with a Crown Ordinance Act which says, all of you Africans, you are tenants at will on your own land. Okay? Second categorization, after independence. So we go to Lancaster House and we are negotiating. What are we negotiating? We are protecting property rights of the people with titles. What about the people who have been displaced? It was never addressed. Category number 4. I like to think of it as the cost of living because I've been there doing so many cases. It's sad. So these are people who are displaced because of what we call the 10-mile coastal trip, where the Crown decides to own land there, you need a title. And most of these people who had been there for centuries, it was their grandfathers, it was their great-grandfather's land. They don't even know that titles are being given. I remember one very sad case. A man is sitting outside his hut, and a company has been given a title because it has bought from somebody else who has been given a title and allocated this land, and they demolish his house and he collapses and dies. Not aware. Now, first track, category number 3. How do we address this problem? Politics. It is a political kind of way. What happened? The government came up with resettlement schemes. Some of them, the allocation was very corrupt. Then the government also came up with allocation processes and also development in the coastal properties, for example, of tourism. But then who gets the land? Who builds the hotel? How much trickles to these people? I've done cases where fish landing sites have been grabbed and a big hotel is put there, and these people can't even fish. Okay? First track, during the clashes in Kenya, a lot of people were displaced, and even up to today, they cannot recover their land. Lastly, but not least, climate change. I'll give you an example on my desk, Lake Obosorot in Adarwa. I don't know how many of you know that this is the source of the Wasoniro, which is celebrated spiritually in Isiolo. It serves 5 counties. The river has dried up. A lot of people are doing a lot of things about it, but in conflicting ways, which is not synergetic. I tried to come up with a system where we could put it all together. We are still trying to do that. Now, my experience in dealing with land injustices, Professor, I don't know whether I have more time.
Yes, 1 minute, 2 minutes.
Okay, I'll really summarize. Number one, unless we look at the issues in a holistic way, we are going nowhere. Doing a piecemeal case, like in our own usual common law controversial system, where it is this man with a title and the other one doesn't have a title, we are going nowhere. We have to be very deliberate in being holistic, whether we are coming together as professionals, NGOs, CBOs, as professors in the university, whether we are coming, whichever way we are coming up with, community coming together, traditional leaders, and our own government leaders, we have to come up with a system where it is an holistic way of informing the outcomes and coming up with innovative ways of addressing issues. Two, we have to be very deliberate and very strategic in looking at land, not as a lamentation about what happened, but as how we can have very deliberate way of budgeting. In our policies also, the development of our policies, they have to be very deliberate, where we can have deliverable, accountable, and enforceable, integrated policies, where people can actually benefit. How we look at land doesn't have to be possession. It doesn't make sense to have thousands and thousands of acres of land, and it is not even bringing any wealth to the county. We have to think of ways how we can use our economy to reskill and upskill our people, how to create our trade mechanism where we can be more innovative. And if I'll have a chance, I have 7 ways in which this can become a reality and breathe life into Section 19 of the Land Act, which gives the Commission ways of dealing with these issues. Thank you.
I've seen a lot of articles pro repatriating artifacts, things that were taken away. But then there's also this argument that if the museums were to return them to the original places that they came from, chances are these African countries that have substandard museums would not be able to take care of them, considering that they've had these for hundreds of years. Now we all want the stuff back, but do we have things in place for when they do come back to take care of them? And also, actually, there was a couple of articles that talked about the amount of money that those who currently have the things would be losing.
We have the legislation, 1925 Act in the Kenya colony, which prescribed all forms of traditional medicinal practices, and anyone who was practicing benign medicine for the use of community, anything they were using, their paraphernalia was confiscated, and then those were shipped out. We have academic researchers who came, they went to communities, took away things in the name of research. We have religious conversion, which was used to attack the core of people's identity. Then we have the normal traders who came and collected items because they knew the value of this in their home countries, and therefore they were trading with those museums. And also we have other legislations like the alcohol legislations in Kenya that were used, and the colonial administrators. So that's how those things left. Most communities did not give their objects. And because there were gross human rights violations in the process of acquisition of these objects, it's a human rights issue for these objects to come back. Now, whether they're going to be taken good care of, I think is not a subject for us to engage in. The first thing, bring back the things. What we do with them, because a number of those objects does not even belong to institutions we call museums. They're not supposed to be in sanitized, air-conditioned environment. If communities of origin get their objects back and the culture dictates that those things should be banned, so be it.
Thank you so much. Great points. Now, I'm going to ask you the same question. And I just want to say, It's such a pleasure meeting you. I'm originally from Jamaica, and so the music and our culture really connected with your father and all of his comrades. And so I'm just like honored to even be in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, our moderator. My take on Artifact goes back many years, First World War. Before we speak about Dedan Kimathi, my father, even if he did go there as an artifact, he participated in the First World War and never came back. So we don't know where Kimathi's father Washuri, Dedan Kimathi is called Dedan Kimathi Washuri. He went back, he went to the First World War and he never came back. We don't know whether he died in the war or he was taken as a slave in America. Sometimes I see these black Americans and I say, maybe these are my relatives, we don't know. Washuri maybe got a wife and we don't know. Yeah, it's very true. We don't know where. Maybe it's for the first time Kenyans, they didn't know that Washuri did not come back. Then now we come to Kimathi. And before I come to Kimathi, so many years ago, 114 years ago, we had the head of Koitaro Arab Samoei. He was beheaded and the head was taken to the UK. I visited the home, the mausoleum, and there is only that grave site, and the body, it's there, but where the head is supposed to be is just a hole. Before we start asking for what they took from Kimathi, there are so many things that the colonialists went with. Then we come to our hero, Dedan Kimathi. Everyone in Kenya know, and maybe our friends from the international community, that Kimathi was, when he was captured in 1956, he was in October 1956, he was wearing a leopard skin. A leopard, he has killed himself, and a cap. Up to now, we don't know where the leopard skin is. Rumors have said they went with it. We have an advisor for the Minister of Culture. Sometimes back we heard it was there, but we visited and it's not in our Kenyan museum. We also have Kimathi gun. It was the one that made the colonialists say that he should be executed for carrying a rifle and ammunition. That gun, I don't think it's wrong in our museum. Wherever it is, we demand it back. Where we are going to put them or keep them safe, it's none of anyone's business because it is ours. When it comes to Kenya, and as a family, we think that we are not so much good in keeping them. We are patriotic. We cannot own Kimathi. Kimathi is national and Kimathi is international. We also have, in our family right now, we have the belt that Kimathi, by the way, he went to Second World War. He went to Burma, the current Myanmar, in 1941 and came back in 1945. The belt that, the leather belt that he was using as an army commander in Burma, we have it in our home. And we also have a bicycle that he was arrested. Chief Moba, 1952, he was first arrested by Chief Mohoya in Nyeri, and he has a small prison break. There was a bicycle that he was using so many years back. Elders from Nyeri brought the bicycle. We have the bicycle, and we have some good. We have something good. But the government, the various government, maybe want to take them back and put them in the museum. I don't think the family has a problem. It can be
Yeah, it's really up to your decision.
Yeah. If the family we feel that we are capable of keeping the artifacts, it's well and good. If the government maybe want to keep the artifact because you'll be gone, but the generation to come, it's good that you tell them that there was a war in Kenya, there was a Mau liberation, and there are so many. And the last one, there are so many artifacts. When the colonizers or the Lincoln bombers bombed the forest, and they did an ambush, they could carry records, Mau records in sacks, and from those ones we are very much sure they were from direct to the UK. I have confidential information. Maybe I should not say it here, but we know where the archives are. We have they are there, and it's maybe whether it's good or bad. I say that I was privileged, or I got a chance to meet the king when he came to Kenya. I had 30 minutes to talk to the king, and I asked him about the whereabouts of my father, and I told him my father participated in your war. He supported the British, your mother, but little did he know that 12 years back he would be pleading with the queen to save him from the hangman. And let me tell you, the king was so much shocked to hear that Kimathi is still in Kamiti maximum prison. Kimathi is a missing person. We cannot call him he himself is an artifact. Why is there Kimathi's body? We have a missing person in Kenya. We also have 24 mass graves in Kenya. People buried in shallow graves. We have one in Deya. I've seen it. I mean it's so much in me, this history. It burns in me. I think even if tomorrow you say we go back to the forest and fight again, let me tell you, I can go back. Yes. But because we are not fighting back, right now Kenyans know and always have gone back to the forest to mitigate the climate change and planted 4 million trees.
Or with the colonizers. If you take, for instance, the first interaction between the black South Africans and the Europeans, the Dutch. I was in South Africa for my further studies. And the traditions or people have this kind of narrative that the blacks actually accommodated those people. They gave them land which was not virgin because the argument was we can go into the hinterland, let these visitors who are very tired enjoy whatever that we have been having. European historians will not tell you that Africans were that sympathetic. We are just being betrayed and portrayed to be this heathen, barbaric race that is having problems adopting any form of civilization. We were discussing with my good friend Sam. No historian has ever told you that in Kenya we lost 6,750,000 acres of land to white settlement. The best of our land, arable land, the land that was described to be 5,000 feet above sea level, which is well watered with good rains and other stuff like that. And when we got independence in 1963, the British had become embarrassed and they were like, let's return the 1 million acre land. 1 million, that's why there was that so-called million acre settlement scheme. But that's not my point. When we got independence in 1963, in Kenya, I've said we had lost 6,750,000 acres. Zimbabwe had lost 17 million acres when we got independence. But between our independence and their independence in 1980, they lost a further 18 million acres. How do you explain that? The independence in Kenya made the British settlers uncomfortable being under black leadership. And that's why they sold off their land, which they got for free, and they were selling 5 times the price they were buying in Zimbabwe. So that if you are selling 1,000 acres of land in Kenya, you are able to buy 5,000 acres in Zimbabwe.
Wow.
Historians will not tell you that. Historians will not tell you that our independence was a very expensive affair in the Zimbabweans. Then, 1980, when Mugabe became the prime minister and essentially the de facto leader of Zimbabwe, the same white groups who will not want to live under anybody left for South Africa. Mandela, we know very well, in 1994, became the first black South African leader. And they also, from South Africa, they left for Australia. So we must understand the pattern of all these people. We must understand the nature of these colonizers. When they talk about international crimes, stealing of artifacts calls for restitution, and failure of it should have international sanctions. Today, if you are accused and convicted of a crime against humanity, war crimes and genocide, they'll come for your property. It's time we go for our property. Artifacts are our national heritage, cultural heritage. We should always agitate for their return. It's none of anybody's business to know how we keep them. We can ban others, we can improve on others. We use those that have been brought to teach our children to come up even in a better way of developing them.
Exactly.
These were intellectual property. In the Constitution of Kenya, intellectual property is as good as any other property. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much. So excellent points. Excellent points. Because we're looking at the next generation coming up in, especially the STEM programs that are popping up all across the country. Yeah, I really like that idea. It's a great opportunity to encourage our children to improve on whatever exists. If we want to preserve them however we want to, then they can carry it forward. So thank you so much for those points. Now, let me just call on the people calling from Nigeria. Mr. Enote. Should I butcher it or just leave it? Do you think you'll appreciate it if I try?
Yes.
Okay. Of Bebor. And Mr. Godfrey Ekatur. Are they on the line? Hello, from Nigeria. Nigeria, everybody knows about the Benin bronze statues. This has been, that has been one of the largest efforts to repatriate some of our artifacts. I know also in Ethiopia, the Ethiopian World Federation has been working on the Mandala artifacts to get that back to Ethiopia as well. So we've had several initiatives to do this, and even just considering some of the points the panel brought up, it should not be this big of an issue to get these things back. But again, the ones who have taken it, they know more, most of the time more than other issues. They've stolen it. They have no receipt. And they don't have any receipts. You ask them how much. Who did they get it from? But then they feel that they're entitled to keeping it. Side note real quick, my actual first involvement in any activism was in Toronto, in Canada, probably 32 years ago. The Royal Ontario Museum had they initially called it Into the Heart of Darkness. And it was an exhibit about African artifacts that they had in the museum. And it was so demeaning so many of the captions. So the community decided to protest. They had to rename the exhibit and they thought that would pacify us. But we continued the protest until they had to close the exhibit and stop it from going to any other city. And so this has been something that it's been, I said 32 years ago, right? A long time, and we're still struggling to get the things back. Thank you so much, Anotie. And I think there was one other person that was supposed to be on from Nigeria, Godfrey, Ecuador. No, he won't be, so we'll just have Anotie. So, as far as here locally, what's the update? Have we made any progress in a lot of the initiatives that we're doing here in Kenya to get not just an audience, but the discussion for the actual return of things? This struggle is all over. Even in Tanzania, there was a similar situation where a chief, a very prominent chief in the southeastern region, the same thing, he was beheaded. And before I let you answer, it's really interesting, even thinking about one of my favorites, Patrice Lumumba. How inhumane some people can be and have been to actually kill someone and take a body part. Any progress on the work to get the things from Kenya to be returned?
I think a little bit of background to this. I think the current clamor for return began sometime in 2017, again, kind of gaining momentum when President Macron visited Ouagadougou and announced that the French government was willing to return objects. The African Council of Museums then followed up with a letter to all the African museums asking for a list of objects that they wanted to be restituted. Unfortunately, none of the museums had any list. So first thing forward, so we as Kenya, because my home institution is the National Museums of Kenya, where I work, and now currently on secondment to give advice to national government. And so we realized that we didn't have that database even within the country. The second thing that was happening, Kenya has not been a signatory to the 1970 Convention or UNESCO Convention on transfer of illegally or stolen cultural property. Parliament, just yesterday, the Kenyan Parliament ratified that convention. So the Parliament confirmed that now Kenya is a state party. So that process is ongoing. So it's going to Ministry of Foreign Affairs, then it will be deposited in the UNESCO in Paris. Now, but once that is done, there will be a subsidiary legislation to domesticate that act within our laws, and then follow with regulation that will help us now move the process forward. So what have we done as a country? National Museums of Kenya, in partnership with activists in Nairobi, the Nest Collective, and activists in Europe, and two museums in Germany, Robert Storch Jost Museum and Walter Kulten Museum in Cologne and Frankfurt, then created what we call International Inventories Program. The objective of International Inventories Program was to create a database of all the stolen, all the artifacts from Kenya that are currently domiciled in the global north. So far, that database, if you check the website, International Inventories Program, it has about 33,500 plus objects from 30 institutions in 7 countries. Now, that process was funded externally. So what we are doing now is to make it a government-led process.
Wow, I think they need a round of applause. That's awesome. I hope everybody's made notes of those websites that they've heard, the one on the Benin and this one, so you keep on top of what's going on and know when the rallying cry goes out. Sign the petition or do the march. So you guys have to keep your ear to the ground. Any progress?
Thank you, moderator. In my part, the progress, I can say I'll just go back to the king. To us, it was a blessing in disguise, because I asked him about the British archive, where they carried so many sacks of Mau records, and all the records of the whereabouts, of the names of people who are hanged, the name of those people. I think the UK government are the best in keeping records. They have everything, let me tell you. They are not known. It's only the few, they managed to ban. They banned most of them, but I can say 80% were brought there. And when I asked him to assist us at least to get the remains of our hero, Didier Kimathi, he was a bit emotional, and as he was coming out of the room, he just whispered to me and he told me, I'm going to inquire. That meant that he's going to, he cannot make any political decision. It's not a political, so he cannot make any political statement. He told me he's going to maybe to inquire me from the Prime Minister, and I can say last week the British High Commission called me and they asked me for my address, and they say the King won't write to me. I can say all what we can do, everyone in this room and everyone in the country, in Africa, we should be in solidarity. Stealing is stealing. Stealing of one artifact is stealing of everyone's artifact. We should be in solidarity and push the UK government and all the French government and the world, the Dutch, to bring back the artifacts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do not want to rehash. I think there's been a lot of very good narrative background information all the way from Nigeria, and also our government official here. And I must really applaud the kind of legislation that the government came up with, that not only is it the responsibility of the government, but we have also been given the responsibility of agitating. Remember, the government might not be in a position to even prepare that database. So I think a very good room has been done for the activists, the NGO, and everybody else who really care about Africa to be able to go to the government and introduce some of these things that could have been forgotten into the database. Remember, these are things that can be brought back to Africa. These are artifacts that can generate a lot of income. It is actually encouraging that the British and other Western nations were unable to get the formula for constructing the pyramids. What they would have done, they would have destroyed the ones in Egypt and built others overseas. But it's good that they could not reach that level of they did not have architects to be able to do that. and they would have gone ahead to patent it, the formula for constructing pyramids. They would have done that. They are very good when it comes to turning things around. But we have to make sure that they don't succeed all these other things. And we need to tell them that what they are doing is not right. Even the kind of religion they were preaching to us, we have realized that we are more religious than them. Look at the kind of dilemma they are in when it comes to very basic things about even marriages and other stuff like that. They seem to be a very confused lot. So I think we are the sober people to explain to them the many things that they are not sure of. They don't seem to be very sure of so many things. So I think there's a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. Let's continue agitating and clamoring for what is rightfully ours. Let Africa be proud of its heritage. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, wow, I did amazingly well. It's 3:58, and I was told I should be done by 4. Look at me. And my panelists, you know what I mean? They said what they had to say succinctly, and yeah, amazing. So we do have a few minutes for questions. Any questions from the audience? Questions or comments? And listen, help me to continue to be great. So my people that's going to comment and questions, please make it direct and short. Okay, can we get the mic?
Right, thank you so much, the panelists, together with the moderator. My name is Seo Wycliffe. I'm a student at Mount Kenya University, currently studying criminology and security studies. Now, my question goes, I know even as we advocate for the repatriation of our artifacts, do you think with the introduction of NFTs simply stands for the non-fungible tokens, could be a solution to minimize theft cases on pieces of artifacts once they have been brought back to the country? What would be the mechanism of minimizing theft cases? So do you think with the introduction of NFTs could be one of the solutions? Thank you.
Just as you see in streets of London, the support for Palestine and all these things that are going on, you're not forgotten. So definitely reach out to small associations in the diaspora to continue this cause.
Santi. Greetings everybody, my name is Zita Holborn and I'm a community and human rights and equality campaign in the UK, but also a trade union leader, including for 2 unions involved in the culture sector, working in the museums and galleries, including the British Museum, and I'm also the national chair of the Artists Union of England, and I run a race equality organisation, black-led race equality organisation in the UK called Barak UK, Black Activists Rising Against Cuts, but I'm a multidisciplinary artist. So I wanted to say that these things are happening already in terms of the comments that have been made about what can we do, what could the diaspora do, and I wanted to talk about how we can connect together that campaigning. So for example, when I got on the plane on Sunday, I couldn't join a joint action by cultural workers and cultural organisations, including my union, which was a sit-in staged at the Tate Gallery, one of our biggest galleries in the UK, in support of Palestine because of the cultural washing of Palestine artists and art creators. And I've been involved in organising and participating in sit-ins in museums and galleries and direct actions, including the British Museum, where we did an unofficial tour of the British Museum around stolen artefacts, but linking it with the fact that most of the workers in the British Museum are black and brown, are migrant workers, and are facing racism and worse terms and conditions than other workers, lower pay, and we were campaigning against oil sponsorship by BP. So we linked all of these things with multiple grassroots organisations. But when I did this unofficial talk with other art historians in the museum, the security came and followed us around and closed the Africa galleries to stop us from going in them. So this campaigning work is happening all the time. There are multiple organisations in the UK, along with the unions who have workers in the museums and galleries. We've overtaken, for example, the Tate Gallery, where I had art in an exhibition to make a political point, because we had workers in there that could get us through the door and find an empty gallery for us to stage a protest in the form of an exhibition. So we do quite a lot of direct actions in this way all the time. And what I was going to say, it would be good to link up and connect and look at how we can coincide these actions when you're doing something on the continent, so that we support in solidarity and do something in the UK, just like we've just done for Palestine on Sunday. And if anybody wants to talk to me or give me their details, you know, please come and speak to me so that we can connect and work together, because the work's happening, we just don't know about it and we're not speaking to each other about it enough. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
This is our intellectual property. Yes, and they give us that plus interest. Thank you.
And I think that James Baldwin has a quote that says, to be African American is to be African without memory and American without privilege. So not having a connection on either side can lead to trauma. An individual trauma that manifests itself in action can look like personality. Collective trauma that manifests itself in collective action can look like culture. So sometimes when we talk about the cultural challenges that we have and the personality challenges that we have with people, we're not responding to the personality of the culture, we're actually responding to the trauma. And there's a saying that you may have heard before, that if we don't heal our trauma, we'll bleed on people that did not hurt us. So that's why it's important for us to really think about healing our trauma, so that when we do connect, we're coming from a place of being healed and not from a place of trauma. With that, I'll hop into what I came to talk about. So I want to highlight the disproportionate impact of climate change on a particular region. The reason I want to focus on the Caribbean is that it is seen as ground zero for the climate conversation. And it is important that we say that our people didn't get to the Caribbean because they went on vacation or they wanted to go there by choice. Our people were there because they were enslaved, they were kidnapped, they were murdered at the hands of Europeans. Framing a narrative is important because we have to speak out about the ongoing and original crime against humanity that led to us being there, that was compounded by underinvestment and underdevelopment. Zora Neale Hurston, the Creole poet, said that if you were silent about your pain, they will kill you and say you enjoyed it. So as I said, the Caribbean is ground zero for global climate change because of the exposed location of Caribbean islands, the relative isolation, and the small size. The Caribbean is also has large coastal populations that are exposed and at the mercy of rising sea levels, stronger storms, and worsening droughts. Despite their disproportionately small contributions to global greenhouse emissions of these climate disruptions, putting many of their people, economies, which are largely dependent upon tourism, deeply in debt and leading to increased displacement and climate refugees across the region. Scientists say that without immediate action, the Caribbean could eventually become uninhabitable. What we are already seeing is increased air and ocean temperatures that are leading to extreme hurricanes and increasingly powerful storms. These impacts, paired with rising sea levels, have already harmed human health, the ecosystems, water and food supplies, critical infrastructure in the region, and underserved communities are suffering disproportionately as a result of this. What is already happening in the Caribbean, as well as what is projected to happen there, is a harbinger for what will happen with the rest of the world if we don't act. So what are the solutions? Asset-based framing is important because it recognizes not just the challenges we cancel due to climate change. History as well as contemporary times, show us that the current system of capitalism and white supremacy values profit over people, power over principle, and white comfort over global fairness and justice. So we should be mindful to learn from these efforts of the African diaspora, the people of the African diaspora have been leading. On a national level, countries are taking aggressive actions to mitigate the impact of global climate change. Black-led countries, despite the relative size of their economy and their even smaller share, again, we must say this, to contributing to the climate crisis, the Prime Minister of Barbados, Niamotli, developed a plan to completely stop the use of fossil fuels in that country by 2030, a little bit over 6 years from now. Additionally, they're devoting resources to the restoration of coral reefs and developing infrastructure that will reinforce buildings and store fresh water. But the Prime Minister knows that these actions must come with change in other areas too. As part of the plan, she called for reform of the global financial system. The changes she outlines calls for the mobilization of $1 trillion US dollars in loans for quote-unquote low-income countries for climate resilience and remediation. Additionally, when there are climate emergencies, that the suspension of the repayment of these loans must happen. A theme is developing and evolving and coming up that African diaspora-led organizations and countries design holistic solutions to climate change, not just solutions that are targeted at a specific issue. They recognize that systems uphold challenges, and so solutions must be multidisciplinary, intersectional, and systemic as well. So what is the role of philanthropy? This is where philanthropy can play a critical role. So let us be clear from the outset. Philanthropy alone does not have the resources to address climate change. But what it can do is spark innovation. And it can also center equity. A particular philanthropy, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, has actually said recently they're shifting all of their resources to addressing climate change. The scale of this is clear when you understand that the endowment of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is $13 million. And they give out about $500 million every year. So all of those resources that used to go to other things now they go into remediating the impact of climate change. We still need shifts. We need shifts like this within philanthropy, within government, and organizations to address this global challenge. But the voice of people of African descent is critical to this work. It cannot be done without our genius, our resources, and our involvement. This requires a shift from Eurocentric mental models that center white people as donors and Black and brown communities as recipients of it. It sets up a dynamic that undervalues African innovation, genius, and strategies to the detriment of us all. I want to end by, I know this could be a heavy topic, so I want to end with something that I observed from nature. As I was watching the National Geographic program, it was on the monarch butterflies. Y'all know what the monarch butterflies look like? They're these regal butterflies that are kind of dark orange and black around the edges. So when I was watching this, what interested me and what stood out was that they migrate from Mexico to Canada. That's a long journey. It takes them 4 to 5 generations to make this migration. That means that the monarch butterflies that are in Mexico will never see Canada. And those that are in Canada have never seen Mexico. But each generation does their part to make sure that they get there. That was powerful to me. They just kept going. They just kept going. As I watched the program even more, they said that every now and then, when the conditions are right, there is a group of butterflies that make this migration in one generation. They fly higher, farther, and faster than any other group. They call this the super generation. That's us in this room. We are that super generation. Because there was a generation of us that died in the oceans. But our story didn't end there. There was a generation of us that wallowed in chattel slavery. But our story didn't end there. There was a generation of us that suffered at the hands of unjust laws, redlining, police intervention, and battery. But we didn't stop there. In fact, we look back, and those of us that are part of that super generation, we look back to our ancestral home. And in one generation, my sister Grace, they came back. So some people were looking for us in the ocean, but we weren't buried there. They thought that our story ended on the slave trading blocks, but our story didn't end there. They thought that they could bury us with policies and programs and practices that undermined our history. They looked for us down in the ground, but we're the super generation. We fly higher, farther, and faster. So let us be encouraged, because just as there is vicarious trauma, there is vicarious joy. So spread your joy to your brothers and sisters. Tell your story. Don't let the narrative be that Black people can't get along. We stand diametrically opposed to that in this room right here by what we're doing right now. So I want to thank you all for taking the challenge, listening to your ancestors that are talking to us. We don't sit alone in this room. This room is way more packed than what it looks like. We carry our ancestors. We carry future generations. We carry the hopes and dreams of all those people. So thank you all for being here, and we look forward to what's coming next.
So it's literally burning our skins. And this is what I have to say. My name is Milia Omskoyo, and I'm part of the Bandung team. I'm also an intern at the National Environment Management Authority. Our next moderator is a representative for the Environmental Committee at the UK House of Commons. So she'll be taking us through reframing COP28 to be an African agenda. So please help me welcome from the online platform, MP, the Honorable Claudia Webb.
Are spending more on servicing debt than they are on building resistance, resilience, and mitigations to the dangers of climate change. Incidentally, as we think about Sankara, it should be noted that Western powers engaged in coups and assassinated so many Pan-African leaders because they knew a united Africa with well over 1.2 billion people, socialist principles, and the world's most sought-after resources, including natural resources, would permanently end the imperial arrangement on which capital accumulation relies. We should never forget what Jacques Chirac, former president of France, when he said we bled Africa for 4.5 centuries, then we plundered its raw materials. Afterwards, we said they are good for nothing. Sankara said, let's create a united front against the debt, and let's stop competing with each other. Our lands are rich, we have plenty of power, and a large market. Let the African market belong to Africans. Let's manufacture in Africa and consume in Africa. In effect, if you apply it to today's world in terms of climate justice, the minerals of Africa need to remain in Africa. In reality, Western colonizers plundered, in particular, Southern Africa to fuel their own industrialization. Now these same industrial emissions are brutalizing the region in the form of toxic waste and climate destruction. This new violence is staggering. The injustice is obscene.
theme. Reframe the conversation about COP28. So, but I didn't welcome everyone back from lunch, so welcome again. Hope everybody had a nice lunch. This afternoon's topic is on climate change. I'm not sure if Peter had said that, but yeah, okay. How do we reframe COP28 with an African agenda? And this is coincidentally very relevant today because COP28 just opened in Dubai this morning. So we should have a very interesting conversation today and hopefully have some information about what happens in COP today for the discussion for panels this afternoon, later on this afternoon. Okay, our panel of experts will explore innovative strategies to ensure that the upcoming COP28 aligns with the unique challenges that we face in Africa here, in the Global South, not just in Africa, but the Global South. We'll seek to redefine the solutions that work for the continent. I'll turn our attention to the panelists, let you introduce yourself, and want to hear your wealth of expertise on this topic. I encourage all participants to actively engage with this today's panel. Ask probing questions. We don't have much time this afternoon, we started late, but we'll try and get as many questions as we can in. Your contribution and your perspectives are very important to this conversation. Like I said earlier, we don't just have conversations, we develop strategies and then we act on them. It is through open and respectful dialogue that we can explore new avenues for collaboration. Okay. So I have on my left here Mr. Jeffrey.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Geoffrey Boer. I'm the East Africa Project Coordinator for Living a Legacy. I also do communications with Vets International and partly a youth advisor on climate issues. And I like to see myself as a community organizer because I mostly work in the local communities and very happy to be part of this platform. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Benedict Odor. I'm an advocate by profession and I work closely with my community, Latewa community-based organization. So part of what we do, we are looking at how we can have conversations on climate change centered around community-owned strategies, community-led policies, and community-developed solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Latewa is one of our partners in our initiatives and programs that we carry out in Bandung, Africa, so we're happy that you're here. I think it's safe to say that we've not reached our targets from the Paris agreements. I said earlier, not much has been done since COP27. Would you say that Africans are in the conversation of COP28? How are we involved, and how much are we involved, and how much more do we need to be involved if possible? You can take that question, Mr. Benedict.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. So, for quite some time, COP28, even the precursor conferences before the COP28, you find that the conversation is mostly premised on the big oil company targets on carbon development of carbon markets, development of the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, which is a follow-up of the Paris Convention. So, not necessarily the main issues that our African communities are experiencing in terms of the adverse effects of climate change, like extreme flooding, extreme heat conditions, inadequate access to essential services like menstrual products for young adolescent girls and women. You'll never hear them on the conversation. it's always about development of the carbon markets, how the big oil companies can tap in the Congo Basin, which has the largest shares of carbon credits in terms of the forest cover. So the steps are there, but the impact is still very much less desirable. So there still needs to be a lot of inclusion, especially of the youths and the marginalized and special groups like the teenage mothers, persons with disabilities, vulnerable women, among others. So the efforts are there, but there are still calls for concerted efforts to have the African agenda really getting ingrained in the conversation. And we'll explore those as we go by with this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan, let me ask you this one. How do you make sure that Africa is not left behind? Because we are now paying the price. The global north they've gone through industrialization, they've got their money, Africa is struggling. We're already struggling after COVID and everything else that we have to face as a global south. We're struggling already. How do we make sure that we're able to contribute to climate change and our own climate action without being left behind?
First and foremost, we need to understand that across the continent there is much desire and solidarity for African to unite under one call, so that when we go at this global platform, we're able to be on one bargaining voice. Because unlike in the past where each regions presented their own demands, and when they went to these global platforms, they centered most of their interests with what they're bringing back to their regions. At the African Climate Summit week that happened in Nairobi, we saw a unanimous effort by African heads of state as we had to cope through the newly Nairobi Declaration that we will call on world leaders to support Africa in terms of climate financing, in terms of availing more and more resources. At COP27, we saw the global north agree to pay the damages that have been done over the years. But now coming to COP, we still have an empty bucket. So that needs to be filled. So it's an urgent call as the COP starts today that we will see African leaders having a unanimous call on our collective bargain.
Okay, thank you. So, continue on that climate finance, how do we make sure that, because how do we not accessing these funds? I think you mentioned we have to come together as our own nations to produce funds in which we can rely on. Is that what did you say that? Or were you talking about the funds that are being set aside for the global south?
Well, there's two sides. So the global north must agree to the fact that they contributed to some of the most devastating effects that are spread across the continent. And they must be able to pay through the Loss and Damage Fund, which was created at COP26 and really was centered at COP27, which we thought was an implementation COP. So aside from that, African nations should also form financing mechanisms to be able to sustain themselves in the future, because we can't just await a fund that has not yet been established in terms of how much are we even talking about. We have 100 billion that was to be paid to African nations. That has not yet been created. So African leaders need to also fund. So if African nations can create a kitty that we are looking to various ways they can support the most vulnerable nations, then that can help us to be more sustainable and to be more self-efficient in addressing climate crisis.
Okay, thank you. But how do we access these funds that are currently being set aside for us? That nobody can access them. What do we do to make sure that, like you said, COP27 was supposed to be an implementation conference, but nothing happened, and since then it's now COP28, nothing has happened. We have to do something as a coalition, so to speak, as different African nations to come together and come up with a solution. How do we get our hands on this money that isn't? It's not a handout. It's rightfully belongs to us.
Yeah, I mean, at the African Climate Summit, we saw the African Development Bank President Adesina committee to form a fund. So this is an African bank that is stepping out and saying, we are committing. So we need more of that. We need more investors and more investment banks, especially from Africa, to step into those efforts. And when we have such kind of funding coalitions that are spread across the continent, then it's easier for countries to access and to also present their demands.
So, Ms. Benedict, I'd like to ask you this one. Perhaps you can shed some light on this. The role of indigenous knowledge in climate adaptation is crucial. How can COP28 integrate this into policy and use traditional African wisdom to combat climate change?
Indigenous knowledge is very much important, especially in the context of climate change adaptation, because you find that some of the most marginalized areas in the continent are the ones which are bearing the brunt of the negative effects of climate change. So bringing it back closer home, the role of indigenous knowledge. The African communities are very much rich in terms of indigenous knowledge on reading the various weather patterns, indigenous knowledge on the different farming practices, indigenous knowledge on meteorology, being able to oversee such happenings before they happen. An example is back here in Kenya, there's an organization we are partnering with that is called Seedballs Kenya. So Seedballs Kenya, we've done a number of initiatives with some tertiary institutions in Kenya. I must mention we have the Dean of School of Law, Catholic University of East Africa, Dr. Jerry Ganethe. So through partnership with such tertiary institutions, we can know the different types of species and seeds of trees to plant, the different species of different food products to plant in different areas. Now coming back to the seedball technology. The seedball technology is an indigenous seed, a local indigenous seed, that is coated in a ball of charcoal dust. So for the past 2-3 years, Seedballs Kenya has managed to regenerate some of the arsal areas in Kenya, arid and semi-arid areas. So what they use, they coat the indigenous seed in a ball of charcoal dust, then they use what we call aerial mapping and aerial surveys to now using GIS technology to map out the different areas to plant the seed balls. An interesting thing about the seed ball, when it's thrown in a dry area, it's able to retain its status until the next rain condition. So the ball of charcoal acts as first nourishment to the seed. Secondly, it protects it from predators until the next rainy level. So these are some of the local indigenous knowledge that Kenya is using to regenerate its arid areas. So why, of course, by working in partnership with the government, why can't we have such suggestions at COP28, where we can leverage on indigenous knowledge to regenerate the formerly arable lands? Secondly, there's a community I've also happened to visit in parts of Marsabit and Samburu. They are able to tell the next rainy seasons by observing how the animal intestines move. It was something quite not really gross, but quite enlightening, So these are some of the indigenous knowledge that the international community needs to tap into instead of coming up with a one-size-fits-all solution. Because what works in Dubai, what works in Europe and South America and North America cannot necessarily work back in Africa. So we need to have specifically tailored solutions that work for us, specifically tailored solutions that our communities understand and are able to participate in towards the climate change conversation.
Okay, so how do you get how do you get these strategies implemented at COP28 now, and to share it with other African nations?
So I happened to be, we've been in a number of these forums before here, a close friend of mine. First, during the UN Habitat Global Assembly that happened here in Nairobi. Our organization took part in that, same to the Africa Climate Summit. So as a precursor to the Nairobi Declaration, which was a declaration on accelerating the transition to green economy in Kenya and Africa, we had a youth declaration that was also factored in the drafting of the Nairobi Declaration. And part of the things that we as youth continue to advocate about passionately is climate financing. Climate financing not in the respect of the finance coming to do an entirely new thing, but building up on the pre-existing solutions that you already have as young people. And also being part of the decision-making table, not to listen, but to have our contribution factored in. So I think by working hand in gloves with not just the government, but even international organizations like Bandung, Imperative Fund, Lide, Barak, all the partners we have on board, we are able to tap into the youthful contribution. Because most of the time, if you go the government way, there's a high probability of being sidelined. Yeah, you understand the African context where as young people, you might have a viable idea, but acceptability in a room where your peers are a bit of age becomes a problem. So what we need is action, environmental action, and having the different players on board, not just the government. Yeah.
Who are these different players and stakeholders?
Different stakeholders from the NGO world, private sector, tertiary institutions like Catholic University of Eastern Africa, tapping into more research and innovation for the ideas that you already have in terms of adapting to climate change.
Could anyone, I want to throw this to either of you. Why was there a need? Would you like to shed light on what you think, why there was a need for an African climate summit? If we're already involved enough in the conversation of COP28, there shouldn't be a need for an African climate summit.
So for a long time, even before the Paris Convention, we had the Kyoto Protocol of the 90s. And before that, we had the Rio Declaration in Brazil before the Kyoto Protocol. So for a long time, Africa has been getting involved, but just as mere participants, but not as the core and the integral partners in terms of design and implementation of the decisions. So the Africa Climate Summit was like our own Kyoto Protocol and our own like Paris Convention, because the African states feel that even the financial architecture on matters climate adaptation, it's skewed in favor of the global north. So what we need is an overhaul first of the global financial architecture. When that happens, then we'll come on the table as equal players. So that will solve the crisis of always pitting the conversation global north against global south, emitters versus non-emitters. That is not necessary at this point. So we need to level the playing field, have everyone on board, And the Africa Climate Summit was a viable idea. And I hope the declaration is going to be fully implemented, including by the AU protocol, because it was uniquely tailored, having in mind the unique challenges that we face as Africa on matters agriculture, on matters the increased conflict caused as a result of the strained resources, livestock, pastoralists, and all that. So it's a welcome idea, but implementation still requires concerted efforts involving all different stakeholders.
Let me ask you a question. How do you think COP28 can encourage the technology transfer and capacity building to empower African nations?
Well, so the design of COP is that they have different pavilions, and we have one unique pavilion, which is the African pavilion. This is where most of the conversation will take center stage. And here we have all voices represented, and it's a platform that is uniquely created for African leaders, for African parties that have been mostly involved, especially with drafting and creating of the Loss and Damage Fund. So this is where most of our bargaining calls will be happening. And we also have the youth pavilion. Most of the participants, I'm leaving for COP28 tomorrow, and I'm also set to speak in different speaking sessions. So it's a step towards the collective again, and it's a platform where we will raise more calls in adaptation, in climate financing, and also in more calling for more inclusivity into these discussions. Yeah.
Should we talk about climate-induced migration? Okay, it's a growing concern. And what measures should be taken by COP28 to address the displacement and support affected communities across the African continent? How do we address this?
My take would be first to draw a very personal experience. The past 2 years, we've had evictions in my community, and this has led to lots of homes being destroyed, and lots of people shifting to different places that are more vulnerable to climate effects. And you find that the urban poor communities are more they're more prone to climate risk, especially when it comes to flooding. It's very stressful even to stay indoors during daytime. And so you have a very good example of a community located in the city that has people living in a camp. People are living in very poor conditions, and that's an example of how climate change is disproportionately affecting the most vulnerable, those living in the margins. And it's really sad that we have a different approach or a different perspective from our government, because we can't go to COP28 and paint this beautiful picture of how we are trying to address solutions in our country, yet we are the same people who are actually causing more and more damages to the people. You know, we have to be very serious in terms of how we are approaching poor people in such settings.
Okay, that brings us nicely to talk about policy. Is that something that needs to be addressed in every individual African countries? We have a problem with policy and implementing policy.
I don't think the biggest problem is implementation. Just a few months ago, our own government lifted a 6-year moratorium for logging. And it was just less than a year when the president committed in increasing the 30% forest, the tree forest cover. And so what you see is we already have policies in place, but then we have negligence by state agencies that are tasked to do oversight, as well as ensure that these kind of policies are followed to the letter. I'll give you a good example. We have the same kind of most urban poor communities in Nairobi are located along the river line and also closer to the industrial area. You find a number of companies, some of them are owned by the state. They're the ones that the culprits of releasing harmful chemicals. So you can't tell a private company to stop doing these harmful practices, yet your very own company, state company, is doing the wrong. So we must be very strict in terms of the kind of implementations, strategies that are being put in place, but also we must stop corruption, because most of these state agencies are being run by corrupted individuals. So implementation, I think, it's where we need to shift more of our focus and attention.
So we have the policy, but not the implementation. We try and fix this. Thank you. Mr. Benedict, I'm just going to ask a few more questions before we throw to the audience. What measures would you say should be taken at COP28 to address displacement?
So at COP28, an interesting factor in the climate-induced displacement aspect is how it interrelates to now women's access to certain essential products. Like, for example, the increased flooding that we are currently experiencing in our country have cut access to some of the most marginalized counties in Kenya. So you find like, I'm very passionate about the women aspect because that's what our organization is currently working on. And we are trying to build on what we have learned as we plan for our strategy in 2024. So you find that women have now to walk long distances in search of food, in search of essential products like menstrual hygiene products. So that predisposes them more even to sexual and gender-based violence cases. So that is a particularly new area that I'd like to see COP28 do something on. Coming up with gender-responsive policy, not just policy, but policy that is based on evidence. Gender-responsive budgeting, especially for the young adolescent girls, because at COP28 we have to rewrite the place of inclusivity in matters climate change. So we have to look at the roles that women have to play, and it's even exacerbated if it's a woman with a special needs, she can't move. So those are some of the areas I'd really like COP28 to reframe their next proposals on, and not just looking at the private sector, the carbon markets, the net zero goals. Yeah, right now there's a very fancy work going on environment, social and governance goals. It's a welcome idea, yes, but the context in which it's implemented is what worries me. So we have to look at especially the inclusivity aspect at COP28 to make sure that the decisions made have to go down to the most basic person in the community who is affected every day. So first I'll still come back to financing, because finance is a prerequisite to, finance is a prerequisite to making an impact in the community. So if they can tap into the existing social capital that we have, because Africa has the largest population of young people, a median age of 19.2 years in the whole world. So if they can restructure their policies such that they tap into Africa's social capital, identifying community-based organizations like ourselves who are doing so much but still need a lot of support in terms of funding, in terms of joint resource mobilization, working closely with Bandung to do joint resource mobilization, now to scale our activities to other vulnerable areas. I think through that, we shall have an impactful COP28.
Does anybody else in the audience have any questions? I think we have two. Can someone push that around?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Enoch Kibeka. I'm representing Victoria 11. She is the CEO of Northern Kenya. I'm the project lead. Yeah, I'm really delighted to be here. I'm an environmentalist and also a climate advocate, but a student. That's my passion. So, my first question, I am directing to Mr. Geoffrey. Yeah, Mr. Geoffrey, I've been doing a lot. And in this aspect of reaching out to inclusivity and also having actions that are articulating change. As a youth, you access to go to COP28, COP27 last year. And the funding, it came not easy. So explain and answer, how can youth voice be easily accessed, and also how can we get the platform for us to hear our voices and marginalized communities, because we are also conveying solutions that are working. Then the second question goes to Claudia. So speaking about our voice as youth and our role in addressing climate action. For us, Move Northern Kenya, using the case study in Marsabit, we have been doing a number of activities. Now we are having Youth Embracing Action initiative program that it aims to bring nature-based strategies. So the question is, how can the diaspora, or how can the people who are outside there saying African youth who are doing viable solutions and are bringing in communities to embrace what they have, they can be scaled up to make a difference. Because at times when we are writing the proposal to the global north, you will find that your proposal is being implemented outside there. And that's our knowledge. Thank you.
Climate change. We Africans, we are just victims. And I believe that whatever is being talked, really, whatever is being, people are going to COP28, those are just hospitals. There's nothing going to happen there, because I can remember when there was a Paris agreement, nothing has been done. Even the funds have not even released. Those are just people, like Africa. One day I met the Minister of Environment of Kenya. I told her that the best thing we need to do, we will normally get taxes in our country here. Why could we set aside a kitty for climate change for Kenya? And instead of going there, you are just there. Let me tell you, 3/4 of these people going to this COP20, they are just going there like beggars. They are going to tell the donors we want the ABCD, and they are not going to fulfill those promises in our countries. Let me tell you, that's the truth of the matter, because I know what I'm talking. Like here, me, I was invited. I told them I cannot go there because I was invited by United Nations, but I told them I would go there because there's nothing is going to. We are just going to waste our time there as Africans. Why could you make our house? Let's make our house. Can we put our house in order? Let's make sure that we are normally like Kenya. We got almost 3 trillion here. Why could you get why could you put 1% for climate change before we go there as beggars? Thank you.
So thank you so much, Enoch Kibeka, a very good friend of mine. I remember the last time we saw each other was during our friend's memorial. We lost a friend due to, so I'll mention this as I respond to his question. We've had climate defenders being attacked. Unfortunately, a friend of ours died because of as a result of being attacked, because of his work of defending the forest. So, just to answer your question and to pick up from where our brother left, it's really sad that last year we went to COP27, and Kenya had the second largest delegates. And I was really surprised because some of the people attending, some of the people going as national delegates, to be very fair, they're not supposed to be there, you know? We're wasting lots and lots of money while someone like me had to fundraise from January to December, to November to be able to make it there. So it's really, really a shame that we have a delegation that just goes around wasting public fund in the name of speaking for country. Even just allocating those badges to people like Enoch, or my friend here Benedict, or any other person across the country has been really difficult to access. So we need to address that. We need also to enable and support individuals to be able to make it to COP. As we speak now, we have our friend Enoch. He has a badge for COP28, but he has no funding. And he has struggled over the years to be able to attend and take part in those discussions. So it's really a matter of self-sacrifice, especially when I speak from my own personal experience. Getting funding has been really difficult. You have to arrange for such kind of an invitation way earlier, speak to your friends or organizations that can support you. So it's really a difficult even way for me to respond to that, because you lack access to funding, and so it's even difficult enabling someone else to have access to that. So if we can lobby for a way funding to be allocated for youth or for different communities, that can really make a lot of changes. And yeah.
I think Enoch's second question was on the proposals. Yeah, the applications, the proposals have been implemented.
elsewhere, right? Yeah, so that's something we've personally gone through a lot as a youth-led organization, where in a year you can do at least even 50 applications for grants, but still no response. But still, we keep fighting, yeah? Because, so a solution we made as an organization to that, right now we are looking at how we can have sustainable programs where we don't have to depend either on donor funding or grants to run our programs. Let me give a classic example. Our organization does a lot, one of them being solid waste management. So like in our community, we work closely with our community members where we salvage materials that would otherwise be dumped in the nearby river. Geoffrey had mentioned that most of the population in Nairobi live along the river lines, yeah? Because rivers are the lifeline of any country. Look at London, River Thames, look at the Hudson River in New York, look at the Yangtze River in China. So we cannot dissociate the development of a nation from the community economic activities from the rivers. So what needs to happen, like for our case, when we salvage the waste, we repurpose it to a useful aesthetic product. It can be a planter, which is a very good substitute for the plastic planters. It can be just different kinds of innovations. So these are the materials that, again, we are now able to sell. Then the proceeds from that, we are able to recoup it to sustain the organization. So instead of applying for funding directly, we look more into leveraging on strategic partnership. It can be maybe Bandung, Africa, Imperative Fund, LIDE have really supported us in our programs, where now the donor knows exactly when and how they come in. So when they are supporting, they are just building on the pre-existing solutions that you already have. So those are some of the areas, Enoch, that we've looked at as youth-led organizations to at least keep our activities sustainable without having to rely excessively on donor funding and grants. But in the event that we get the donor funding or the grant, we then now use it to scale the pre-existing solution that you already have. And until now, that has made us very efficient, effective, but we are looking to increase the impact through further resource mobilization and joint fundraising.
Did you want to address, before we go to the next question, what the gentleman said about Africans going to COP28? It's been a wait since the right time.
Yeah, one thing that I picked from his presentation, currently we have in Kenya the Climate Change Act. It's a new act that was passed in 2016 until recently repealed. So there had been a lot of lobbying from young people like myself, Geoffrey, Enoch, because we meet a lot in these spaces. So right now in the Climate Change Act established what we call the Climate Change Council. So initially there wasn't any youth representative in that council. So because now of the action and advocacy that young people had, they put some slots for young people in there. There's also, they are looking also to operationalize the Climate Change Fund through what we call the FLOCA, Financing Locally Led Climate Action Initiative. So the funds are there, but still access is a problem. But we'll still continue, fight for it until we are at the bargaining table. So the government has made some effort. I can't bash them fully, because, especially in Kenya, because even in this room we have a representative from Nairobi Rivers Commission. So that was a commission that was duly gazetted by the president to look at how they can regenerate urban rivers through sustainable programs. Because along the rivers comes with cases of even open defecation. So when it's raining right now, cholera outbreaks, the waterborne diseases. So there are still complementary solutions we need on matters like sanitation, because that also touches directly on health, especially for the female well-being. So those are still areas for further discussions that we can have.
Good afternoon. My name is Hamza. Mine is just a comment, not a question. I want to actually concur and amplify what my brother said concerning these conferences, whereby there's no inclusivity, such kind of conferences, whereby the parties that have a stake in this matter are not fully involved. Such kind of conferences are done for self-interest. Currently, as you all know, that the country is facing floods. Northeastern part and the coastal part of this country, the roads leading to such regions are impassable. If at all today some donors want to donate food to such regions, or you can't donate to them because the roads are impassable. Governors from various counties, from the 47 counties, are requesting for funds. They need no funds. And now my question is that, how sure are we if the government releases such kind of funds? Are they going to reach the people on the ground? My brother talked about the climate change funds. If the parliament passes the motion to release those funds, are they going to reach commoners like us, or they will be embezzled? So I think the solution to such kind of problems is that we need to change our political governance as a country. The kind of leaders we bring on board after every election are the one causing the mess. I believe in the next election, we shall bring on board leaders who have the heart of the citizens at home.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I think that. Okay. Yes, please go ahead. No, it's okay.
Fine. Thanks. I won't rise. It takes a long time for me to rise up.
Please say.
But I needed to bring in a mature voice. And I won't ask the panelists, but I must confess that I'm very partial to Benedict and what he does with this community. He works in my university where I train young lawyers. And it's a great thing to have a lawyer who has defied all the colonial masters' prescriptions of what an African lawyer in the common law tradition ought to be, a transactional machine, and now he's working to building communities. But my question, where is Ade? I need to have some eye contact with Ade.
I work with the Ministry of Gender, Culture, the Arts, and Heritage, Government of Kenya. The youth are the majority in this country, and I know politicians always respond to what the majority are saying. What I'm wondering from the two panelists is how wide is the movement of young people involved in the topic of climate change? Because I know even the government budgetary processes work through public participation. So I don't know how many times and how many of you attend such forums and present memorandum on issues to do with climate change and funding of your organizations.
Okay, that is Africans coming together to find our own solutions to our climate change problems. Now we have to talk about accountability, how we hold ourselves up to it, and make sure that we follow through and there's actually action. I think it's a common consensus in the room that there's a lot of discussion from the Paris Agreement before then, COP27, COP28, and it seems like nothing is happening. There's a feeling of we're wasting our time. There's a feeling of we should rely on ourselves, which is what we're doing here today. And we want to move the conversation from conversation to actual action. So young people like Benedict and Letewa and Godfrey, Leave for Change. Leaving a Legacy, sorry. And Enoch and other young people and other organizations who are Bandung Africa ourselves, who implement programs, we design programs, we go out into the communities, we see what the problems are, the actual problems in the communities. We go out there and we find solutions and we implement them. And that's what we have to keep doing, and we have to be able to scale it up. One thing we know is that none of this can be done without funding. So whether it is we tax ourselves, a 1% tax, plow into climate change, make sure, like this gentleman said over here, it actually goes into the communities and trickles down to the people who are actually doing the programs and doing the work and making sure we're combating climate change. We have to hold ourselves accountable to that. Are there any more questions or comments? Any more solutions that we can take away from today? Yes?
Actually, I just wanted to remind you, I'm particularly anxious and waiting to hear the response to my brother's question, because I'm a politician, and I'm also Kenyan and Swiss, so I'd like to hear what you guys are doing, if you're engaging the politicians here at all, because where I come from in Switzerland, I'm in the largest left-wing party. And the people who actually move that party and make us listen, they stop us in everything we do, are the youth. We fear the youth in that party. Not just in that party, actually. They fear the youth from my party in that country. So you guys have a lot of power. What are you doing to engage the politicians here? Or parliament?
So one thing we cannot underscore from the climate change conversation is the policy and advocacy bit, which now includes lobbying through our elected political representatives. So in our different programs, we've been able to engage different political representatives. For example, in our case, under the Office of the Woman Representative in Kenya, we have a specific funding from the government called National Government Affirmative Action Fund. Then at the constituency level, we also have the members of parliament who are custodians of the constituency development funds. So it's quite sad to say this, but in Kenya, the political inclinations in Kenya, as long as you are engaged with a politician, at some point it has to be, it's on an interest-based model, and it's not on a trust-based approach, which our organization is very passionate about. So yes, we've applied for the fundings. We work jointly with Nairobi Rivers Commission. I'm seeing their vice chairperson stepped in, Professor Biama. So we have joint monitoring committees, even with the different government MDAs, the ministries, departments, and agencies. So yes, the effort is there, but in terms of political goodwill in Kenya, it's normally on a pro rata basis. What you bring is what you get. So you might have a viable idea, but there is the risk of it being politicized at some point. So we do not underscore their importance, but we acknowledge the role they play, especially the advocacy bit, where, for example, through the programs we've had, the reports we come up with and the recommendations we come up with, we try a lot to lobby them through our elected representatives so they can have them discussed in parliament and passed as bills before being enacted into laws. But the major risk we face during that is the risk of you having to disclose your political inclination at some point, which automatically is going to affect your service delivery as a community-based organization. So the idea might be good, but there is the risk of it being politicized, which at the end now hampers the desired impact that we might have as young people.
Thank you. Perhaps the MP can tell us what the young people are doing in Switzerland to get their attention.
I'd like to hear that as well.
Have you considered having seats for the youth in parliament? Because in Switzerland, the older generation have seats for themselves, and the youth actually have seats for themselves. So in the end, it doesn't matter what your political inclination is. We have in Switzerland two large parties, a right wing and the largest left wing, which I come from, and there are some small middle parties and then smaller left-wing parties. Now, the two largest parties have to have a seat each for the youth. So that means people like you are sitting in parliament, have a seat there. So that means you will represent your own interests, and you don't have to come to people like me or somebody older. That way, we are not gatekeeping whatever it is you want to do. You represent yourself. That's something to think about. And how the youth ended up getting those seats is they threatened to make their own party who didn't listen. So rather than have them actually have their own party, and you know you can be chaotic and make us listen, we decided to create space for them. Yeah. So that is something maybe you should think about and try and find if you can find a way to convince, and I'm being nice when I put it that way, convince your government to consider, because just like you just said, this population here comprises of people like you. It has nothing to do with people like me. This is the youngest population in the world, so it's time we started listening to you. Do you want to respond to that?
So, in terms of allocation of resources, I think the Kenyan government has done quite a lot, because we have a state-specific department called State Department for Youth Development. So under that, we have access to a number of programs like Talanta Hela, which means just money for talent development. We have the Youth Enterprise Development Fund. So the goodwill is there, but again, it now comes to the accountability aspect. Who are the custodians of such funds? Do they really make sure that young deserving people like ourselves get access to these funds? So that's where now the hiccup comes in, because there's a lot of bureaucracy that goes in through. But our current constitution, we have an alternative. We don't have to petition directly through our political representatives. There are things we call public interest litigation, where we can take up some of the cases ourselves and have the community, support us through their signatures. We can also, petition the different committees in parliament. It can be the environment committee, it can be the gender equality committee, the legal. So those are some of the avenues that we are also pursuing. But we'll pick up the advice and also continue to improve ourselves based on the suggestions you've made.
We're going to have put one more question to the floor, and then we can close this panel. Were there any? Okay, we'll have some. Ask questions. Are there anybody else? Any other questions or comments? Apart from the gentleman. No more. Okay, that will be our last question today.
Mine is just a comment. What is killing African people, or whatever? Let me say, what is killing us? We professional people, we depend on politicians. One day I was invited to Safari Park Hotel. We were to discuss the issue of bottom up. We were called people from different professional bodies, universities, policymakers, the researchers. But one thing I told them, remember, we have been having some president in this country. Remember, Uhuru was there for 10 years. Ruto is here maybe for 5 years or 10 years. Are we going to depend on politicians in every policy they are bringing on our side? I told them I cannot even contribute here, because we professional people, we are becoming like a stupid people in this country. We are here to guide the politician, not politicians to guide us. Whatever we are doing in this country, because when you talk a professional person, you know what you are doing. A politician will be here for maybe a contract of 5 years or 10 years. So we don't need to depend on politicians. Let us come up with a good policy to guide the country. And they told me you are really controversial, but I told you that's my stand. Thank you.
Well, they're in office. And it's very sad that knowledge is not, awareness is not properly dispensed across the community to enable people to come to participate at these public participation forum, as well as we have the Youth Development Fund. And for the last 5 years, my area constituency, that youth fund has not been working. Simply because they are blaming those who took the loans and never returned them. So it's almost like a small group of people had access to that funding, they didn't pay back. So now the community, other based community organization can't access that funding. So in the past 5 years, we've been going to this public participation forum and asking our area MP, where is the fund? And we know there is a location that has been set aside to touch on youth. So I think one of the ways young people can mobilize themselves is actually getting into politics. And this is why I'm also inspired to be a politician someday in the future, because I believe if you can't be in the parliament, then you will not represent, you will not be represented, and so the majority won't be heard. So we have to take these seats by ourselves, and bring reforms. We have to actually take part in those processes. And in the 10th parliament, we had a very youthful MP. He was 23 years from Meru, and he did very well. So why not challenge ourselves to get into those seats? Because many a times we think these seats can't be occupied by young people. But if I get into parliament, I'm sure I'll be making troubles all the time and ensuring that those funds, allocations are going to the people who deserve to access. So it's not even about asking them, because we go there, we go to these public participation forums where we ask them serious questions about where the money is going. They're not responding either, or they either bash you. But we have to keep the fight, we have to keep the struggle, and just as a fellow young person said, it's about the people we are electing into office. 70% of young people in Kenya can galvanize themselves, form a party, and come 2027, we can really bring reforms to our country. Yes.
Thank you. At least they don't tell you the snake eaters. All right, so I'd like to say thank you to our exceptional panelists for their valuable insights and expertise. They have shed light on a complex issue surrounding COP28 and climate change. And if you'd like to get involved and support any of our programs and initiatives or their programs, where we partner with both these organizations, please visit our website, bandungafrica.com, and any of our social media handles for information on how to be part of the movement. I think this afternoon we now have a workshop. I think there's a break before the workshop. I don't have the schedule here with me, but I think we can have a little break right now. Thank you very much.
Have a breakout session for 3 workshops. The logging of trees, going to be led by Geoffrey Boyer from the Building a Legacy. Workshop 2 is going to be led by Benedict Odwor, Ms. Shital Ahir, and Jude Quach. It's on the nexus between sexual reproductive health rights, and climate change. Benedict? Is there? The last workshop is on regenerating urban rivers. It's going to be led by Professor Biama from Nairobi Rivers Commission. So kindly, if you do not mind, just a little bit exercise, stand from your seat as we just do resetting of the seating arrangement. Thank you.
Hi, so this first workshop here, this one with Benedict Odor, and it's going to be looking on the nexus between sexual reproductive health, rights, and climate change. So with Benedict Odor, please stay here. Thank you. The second workshop, just to re-emphasize this, the moderators is Professor Biama, of Nairobi Rivers Authority, Regenerating Urban Rivers. He has his hand up, so we need to put the two tables together. We have to get up out of our seats to be direct. And if you're wanting to talk about regenerating urban rivers, please join this table here from Nairobi Rivers Authority. Commission, I beg your pardon. And the third workshop.
Greetings, my name is Ade Oguntoye, and I'm from Atlanta, Georgia in the United States. I co-lead a fund called The Imperative. We are a philanthropy that's dedicated to the wealth, health, and connectedness of Black people globally. We focus on healing-centered philanthropy, which aims at solving those challenges for Black people in a way that respects our traditions and culture. But one of the things that I'm most proud of is we created a Swahili language curriculum in partnership with the University of Nairobi and the National Museums of Kenya. That curriculum was adopted by the state of Georgia, making it the first indigenous African language that has been approved. So any student in the state of Georgia can take Swahili. And so until Black people get the wealth we deserve, that our health is, both our spiritual, mental, and physical health is optimal, and that we are connected as a people, we wouldn't have achieved our goal for it. Well, we're a small fund. As I said, the Swahili language curriculum was done in partnership with the university system and the National Museum system. That was actually the first grant that we gave. We also partnered with Utafiti Africa, the Chima Foundation, which does work in the community around children's health and wellness and providing access to education for young women. Well, in addition to the knowledge from the subject matter experts who delivered information and the questions from the delegates, the thing that I think that will resonate the most are the relationships we've been able to develop. I think that they will lead to sustainable and healthy partnerships in the future to help us fulfill our mission as well as the mission of those people that we are connected with. Well, I think that those people of the African diaspora have to not only have a seat at the table, we have to be a part of designing the solutions because we are disproportionately impacted. And those solutions need to be supported and they need to be taken seriously because we have genius, resources, and skills that are needed to fully address climate change. If we're not included in the conversation, we never can have full impact of mitigating the harms that climate change have done to the earth. Well, I don't want to gaslight people. As an individual, there's decisions that we can make, but corporations and governments play a much bigger role. So yes, I will recycle. I will drive, cars that are friendly to the environment, but that does not take the responsibility away from corporations, which have a disproportionate impact on the environment, and governments who have both the resources and obligation to do something. I think the thing that I can say that is maybe the most meaningful thing I can say is I see you. You are being seen, and that we are here to support you. I know people say young people are the future. I don't believe that. I believe young people are the present, and so we have to treat them as such.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
My name is Natalie Asika. I'm co-chair of Bandung Africa. Bandung Africa is an organization based out of Nairobi in Kenya and Lagos, Nigeria. We're focused on climate change and social justice issues. I am in Nairobi today for the Bandung Africa 2023 Pan-African Conference. Bandung Africa gets its name from the Bandung Conference in 1955. It emulates the same focuses as they did in Bandung in 1955, focusing on African solutions and African problems and solving them within ourselves. The motivation behind Bandung is a Pan-African unity focusing on social justice issues that affect Africans, Africans on the continent, and Africans in diaspora, and people of African descent globally. Our main challenges that we face as Bandung with any international organization would be the bringing of people together. Bandung Africa is focusing mainly on climate change. Climate change is the biggest challenge facing humanity, bar none. We create opportunities for youth to be exposed to international partners where they may have opportunities to work with different organizations, not only overseas but also internationally in Africa. Pan-African unity is imperative. Diverse voices and collaboration is what we need to progress the development of Africa. The voice of the youth is very important. They are not just the future of tomorrow, they are the leaders of today, and we invite their input. For now, Bandung Africa concentrates on social justice issues and climate change, historical injustices, return of restitution and reparations of our artifacts, not just in Africa, but globally. If you would like to get involved in any of our initiatives and programs, you can visit our website, that's bandungafrica.com, or any of our social media handles, which are all at bandungafrica.com.
My name is Zita Holborn and I'm a trade union activist, a community campaigner and human rights and equality campaigner, plus a multidisciplinary artist, co-founder and national chair of Barrack UK, Black Activists Rising Against Cuts, and we campaign against the racism, injustice and disproportionate impact of austerity on black communities and workers, not just in the UK, but from a global and a Pan-Africanist perspective. I think that the conference has been well organised. This is my third Bandung conference, and I've been involved in the discussions in between as it's been developed, and I can see the progress that it's made. I think that we've had some powerful conversations during this particular conference, but we've also talked about resolutions and actions to take forward that are practical and achievable, and that's crucial because what we don't want is to come along to lots of conferences, talk about the issues, but not come up with the solutions. So I'm looking forward to seeing the resolutions we form and the report back, and working together with everybody else to take them forward during the course of the year. So there's a really strong, coming from the UK, being part of the African diaspora in the UK, there's a really strong climate movement there. However, it has historically been very white-led. And one of the things my organisation does, and other sister organisations that are black-led, is to point out actually that the African diaspora and our families and communities back on the continent have the lived first-hand experience of climate injustice and climate displacement, and so we need to be front and centre of the conversation and the action. So we've been working hard towards achieving that and ensuring that there's a Pan-African perspective in terms of the action on climate, and ensuring that Africa is front and centre of those conversations. So I actually think that our youth are really, really inspirational. And I actually think whilst as an older person, I can give advice, I can share my lived experience. I think it's about having a reciprocal arrangement where older people in activism, who may be very set in their ways and used to doing things one way, actually learn from the youth, and that we share our resources, our ideas, and our knowledge, because then I think we could be very strong and very powerful if we work together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, greetings. My name is Glenn Roy Watson. I'm a retired train driver. I'm a trade unionist from the UK. I drive underground train. I am also the secretary. Not always. It's very sorry about it. I hope you're able to. I'm also the secretary of the Global African Congress. The Global African Congress is a reparation organization that has been in action for around 20 years. We came out of the World Conference Against Racism. So many of us were in the at the UN World Conference Against Racism in Durban in 2001. The conference was meant to take place 2000. It was the decade event, the first one being in 1970, the second one in 1980, but most people were not aware of it, certainly not non-governmental organizations on. But through the work of a comrade named Gay McDougall, and I always want to record our thanks to her effort, the rest of the global community were told that there was to be a conference in 2002 about racism. And it would appear that the UN at the time was not really that interested in dealing with the issue of enslavement and colonialism. So the global African community mobilized, especially those in the West, to ensure that that issue was on the agenda. So it was a very successful conference. People have tried to play it down, and immediately after the conference, it was so-called September the 11th, where the Americans tried to get the whole community, the whole global community, to diverse itself from anything else to fight racism, to fight terrorism. The upshot of it is that the African and African descendants, it's not a term I particularly like, because I don't think there are any African descendants, we're African. But that was the term used in Durban, that we gathered together and we created an organization to take forward the gains from Durban. So within a year of Durban, we met in Barbados and created the Global African Congress. It has to be acknowledged that it wasn't all smooth sailing, because we made sure the conference was African and African only. And that was resented by some. Some left the conference because we demanded that it was, and what we spoke about in Durban was that it would be an African-only conference. The organization is still going, but it has to be said that we have not made the gains that we should have. We have not set fire to the agendas we should have done. And indeed, our aspiration that, for example, on the continent, there are 5 regions and we should have structures in all of those regions have not yet come to fruition. It's one of the things I hope to do while I'm here during my retirement. I hope that gives a small background of some of the things that have started out. Those are two things that I've been involved in. As I said, I'm a trade unionist. I consider myself a Pan-Africanist trade unionist. In the work that I do, I'm bringing Pan-Africanism to the table in the UK as an activist.
What are you taking back home from the Bandung conference
I've heard of this conference before. I've not been before, and I know Peter for some years. So when we met in London during the Windrush campaign and activity, he told me about this. I'd spoken to him before, and he told me that he had moved to Kenya. So I had intended to come to Kenya anyway, 1st of December, for a solidarity visit with some of our members. And the fact that this conference was taking place so close to those dates, I decided that I could rejig my time and be here because I think this is an important conference. It addressed many of the things that we should be concerned about: climate change, our artifacts being returned, and reparation. It didn't say repatriation, but it should say reparation and repatriation. Repatriation is not only about individuals coming back to the continent, but also our artifacts. So it is part of that. Reparation should be pursued because it is a crime against humanity, and colonialism is a crime against humanity. This means that we campaign for reparation until justice is received. So there's no statute of limitation on crimes against humanity.
What would be your advice to the youth of Africa?
Well, I'm retired, as I say. I've had my go at being a youth. I want to say that when we hear, a lot of times people are saying, and there is some correctness to it, about we need not be trying to travel to the Europe. Young people are dying in the Mediterranean, dying in the desert, trying to get to Libya and so on. I think we should find safe ways for our youth to be global community. We should not discourage our youth from being global. Yes, there is a need that we must have people on the continent to build up society here, but not at the price of saying you're not allowed to travel abroad, you're not allowed to use the opportunity of exchange to see the globe. So my advice would be, let's find safe ways to do this. Let's find ways in order to help the continent, but not deny ourselves the opportunity to be global people, because we are global. It's not only the result of the enslavement and our people being stolen. The reality is that Africans travel. We need to look at the history. That we were in America before Columbus. This is a fact. So we're not just now trying to leave the continent, but we can leave the continent and still be a part of what is going on here. The link must remain. I am here because I want to be on the continent. There are people who will help the continent, not because they're here physically, but because of their connection. And if our young people can find safe routes, and I don't mean small boats across the Mediterranean, trying to go through the desert, being enslaved in Libya, and so on. But they must have the right to travel freely. They must have the right to go wherever they want in the world, to be able to see the world. Nobody should be denied it. And Europeans don't deny themselves that, do they? They go wherever they want.
My name's Peter Kipari. I come from Right Kiricho County. Being a teacher, scholar, Gutani being involved, mainly in historical justices. I come from the Niger Tapsimatara family, working took the British to their own course in 1948 through to 1952. Presently, that is thank you. The Bandung conference has really done a lot. According to me, it has become an eye-opener to several issues. First of all, having met Justice Peter about 7 years ago in Kericho, I learned a few things about it. But having participated, I think I've always said that those issues, pertaining issues which have been affecting Africans, and in particular the Kenyans, and also particularly the Kipsigis and families, might in the very near future have a solution. And I'm very grateful about this because all along there's been something to do. Can we have justice to the black people? We are indeed, in a way, a solution to our problems because maybe we contributed in one way or another towards what we are facing. Why do I say this? Africa is the home of international and far-reaching fast food countries. Because without the resources from Africa, they will never be where they are. So in a way, we really help them. That is why they never want to see us rise up, to realize that we are the leaders of the world. And indeed we are. And soon we will take our rightful position as far as leading this world is concerned. Now coming to the climate issues, generally, Kenya has really seen the effect. This past few weeks, it's a lot of flooding all over. And this obviously led due to the serious climate change, which has actually affected us in several ways, despite the fact that we do not have industries here. We want to believe that the ozone layer, which has actually been helping to protect us, has seriously been affected by CCF, our daily space, which has actually contributed to a lot of sunshine, especially the temperatures recently remarkably high, which actually has even caused a lot of problems to most of our states. Point in case is the issue of the dam next to near Nairobi, which the other week rose to almost busting above its ages. That in itself is indeed something we must think about. So this conference actually has shed a lot of light as far as this climate changes are concerned. We are very grateful. My only wish is that those people who are responsible for this should actually rise up to the occasion and ensure that these people who are suffering, who actually never caused it, should actually be helped by those developed countries because they are the ones responsible for what is happening in this global south. Well, youths of Africa or youths in Africa have got a serious measure wrong. If only they get to know that the future belongs to them. Why do I say this? The population in Africa of the youths surpasses nearly the population of the whole world in Africa. Because I'm sure there are more than 70% of the total population of Africa. And you see, this is their life, definitely. So they must rise up to the occasion. And I'm happy that at least most of them are taking up the challenge. I witnessed some of the panelists this afternoon in this conference, and they really articulated these issues quite well. I'm very grateful. Bravo. Please continue keeping up that spirit. Well, as I've said, we are best in territory. But maybe if you allow me, I can give you my contact so that in case one would like to interact with us and even be of help in one way or the other, then they can use K Peter 573 at Yahoo.